The four great ages of power. India was never one single empire that ruled continuously across all of history. Instead, the land known today as India became the heart of many mighty empires that rose and fell across thousands of years. Each empire shaped the people, the cities, the religions, the trade, and the dreams of the subcontinent. Together, they created one of the longest and richest civilizations on Earth. The first great age was the ancient age of kingdoms and early empires. This era began with the cities of the Indus Valley, where merchants, craftsmen, and rulers built organized urban centers beside mighty rivers nearly 5,000 years ago. Later came the kingdoms of the Vedic age, and then the rise of the Mauryan Empire under Chandragupta Maurya and Emperor Ashoka. This was the age when India first became a true empire stretching across enormous lands united by roads, laws, armies, and administration. Buddhism spread across Asia during this period, and India became known for wisdom, philosophy, mathematics, and trade. The second great age was the classical and medieval age. During this era, the Gupta Empire brought a golden age of science, astronomy, literature, and art. Great temples rose from stone, and scholars studied the stars and the human mind. After the Guptas, many regional powers emerged, including the Cholas in the south, who became masters of the sea. Their ships sailed across the Indian Ocean, carrying merchants, soldiers, priests, and culture into Southeast Asia. This was also the era when Islam entered India through traders, conquerors, and sultans, creating new kingdoms and new ways of life. The third great age was the age of the Mughal Empire. Founded by Babur in the 16th century, the Mughal Empire became one of the wealthiest and most powerful empires in the world. Emperors such as Akbar, Jahangir, Shah Jahan, and Aurangzeb ruled over tens of millions of people. Grand cities, forts, mosques, gardens, and palaces transformed the land. The Taj Mahal became the symbol of imperial glory and love. Trade flourished with Persia, Arabia, Europe, and China. Yet beneath the splendor there were tensions, wars, rebellions, and struggles for succession that slowly weakened the empire. The fourth great age was the age of colonial rule and modern independence. European traders first arrived seeking spices, textiles, and riches. Among them, the British East India Company became the most powerful. Through war, diplomacy, and manipulation, the British conquered vast territories and turned India into the crown jewel of the British Empire. Railways, ports, courts, and new cities emerged, but famine, exploitation, and resistance also grew. After long struggles led by countless revolutionaries, thinkers, and reformers, India finally achieved independence in 1947. Today, India is not an empire, but a democratic republic and one of the largest nations on earth, carrying the memory of every empire that came before it. The first cities beside the rivers, long before Rome, before Greece, before the rise of China as an empire. There were cities beside the Indus River. These cities belonged to the civilization historians now call the Indus Valley Civilization. Their people built with baked bricks, laid out straight roads, created drainage systems, and organized trade networks across enormous distances. The cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro stood as marvels of ancient engineering. At dawn, the streets filled with traders carrying baskets of grain, pottery, beads, and cotton cloth. Children ran through narrow alleys while artisans shaped copper tools and carved seals with animal symbols. Boats traveled down rivers carrying goods to distant lands, including Mesopotamia in the Middle East. Archaeologists later discovered Indus seals far from India, proving that trade connected these people to other great civilizations of the ancient world. Unlike many early kingdoms, there is little evidence of giant palaces or towering statues of kings. Some historians believe the civilization may have been governed by councils, merchants, or priestly elites instead of a single emperor. The people worshipped nature, rivers, animals, fertility, and perhaps early forms of gods later seen in Hindu traditions. The houses were advanced for their age. Many homes had wells, bathrooms, and drainage systems connected beneath the streets. In other parts of the world, people still lived in rough settlements, while these cities had urban planning that would impress engineers thousands of years later. But something happened. Around 1900 BCE, many cities began to decline. Rivers shifted, course routes may have struck, and trade routes weakened. Some settlements were abandoned. The great cities slowly faded into silence. As the old cities disappeared, new peoples and cultures emerged across northern India. Indo-Aryan tribes speaking early Sanskrit moved into the region. Their priests composed sacred hymns known as the Vedas. Society became organized into kingdoms, clans, and social classes. Horses and chariots transformed warfare. Fire rituals echoed across forests and plains. This was the beginning of Vedic India. Villages grew into towns and kingdoms fought for land, cattle, and glory. The Ganges Plain became the new center of civilization. Forests were cleared, farms expanded, and iron tools changed daily life. In the West, the Persian Empire rose under Cyrus and Darius. In Greece, philosophers debated the nature of existence. In China, the Zhou dynasty ruled while thinkers such as Confucius taught moral order. Across the world, humanity was entering a new age of kings, armies, and ideas, and India was becoming one of its brightest centers. The rise of Chandragupta and the First Indian Empire. By the 4th century BCE, northern India was divided among powerful kingdoms called Mahajanapadas. Some were monarchies, while others were republics governed by councils. The greatest among them was Magadha in eastern India. Its fertile lands, strong armies, and river routes made it rich and dangerous. At the same time, a storm arrived from the west. Alexander of Macedon marched across Persia and invaded northwestern India. His soldiers crossed mountains, rivers, and deserts, fighting fierce tribes and local rulers. Though Alexander eventually turned back, his invasion shook the political balance of the region. In this era of chaos, a young man named Chandragupta Maurya emerged. Legends say he came from humble origins, though some believed he had royal blood. Beside him stood Chanakya, a brilliant scholar, strategist, and political thinker. Chanakya dreamed of uniting India under one ruler strong enough to resist foreign invasions. Together, they built alliances, raised armies, and challenged the rulers of Magadha. Battles thundered across plains filled with infantry, cavalry war, elephants, and archers. Eventually, Chandragupta captured the capital Pataliputra, one of the largest cities in the ancient world. Pataliputra stretched beside the Ganges River, surrounded by wooden walls, towers, gates, and canals. Greek visitors described bustling markets, royal palaces, gardens, and administrative buildings. Officials recorded taxes, monitored trade, and organized the empire with astonishing efficiency. Chandragupta then expanded westward, defeating the successors of Alexander. A treaty with Seleucus, the Greek ruler, gave Chandragupta territories in exchange for war elephants. These elephants later helped shape battles far beyond India. The Mauryan Empire became the first great empire to unite much of the Indian subcontinent. Roads linked distant provinces. Messengers traveled vast distances carrying imperial commands. Farmers cultivated rice, wheat, sugarcane, and cotton, while merchants traded ivory, spices, gems, and textiles. After Chandragupta, his son Bindusara ruled and expanded the empire further. Then came Ashoka, one of the most famous rulers in world history. Ashoka began as a fierce prince hardened by warfare. To secure the throne, he crushed rivals and led campaigns of conquest. His greatest battle came against Kalinga on the eastern coast. The war was catastrophic. Ancient records describe rivers of blood-burning cities and hundreds of thousands killed, captured, or displaced. When Ashoka walked across the battlefield after victory, he was horrified by the suffering he had caused. This moment transformed him forever. He embraced Buddhism and declared that true conquest should come through peace, morality, and compassion rather than endless war. Across the empire, he built stupas, monasteries, roads, wells, and rest houses. He carved messages into stone pillars urging kindness, tolerance, and justice. Missionaries traveled from India to Sri Lanka, Central Asia, and beyond, spreading Buddhist teachings across Asia. Under Ashoka, India became not only a military empire, but also a spiritual force whose ideas would influence billions of people over centuries. Ashoka and the turning of the wheel. The empire of Ashoka stretched from the mountains near Afghanistan to the forests of southern India, and from the Arabian Sea to the Bay of Bengal. It was one of the largest empires on earth during its time. Yet, unlike conquerors who celebrated only power, Ashoka began to reshape his empire around the idea of dharma, meaning moral duty, righteous conduct, and care for all living beings. Stone pillars rose across the empire carved with royal edicts in different languages so that ordinary people could hear the emperor's message. Travelers approaching these pillars would see lions, bulls, elephants, and wheels carved into polished stone shining beneath the sun. Villagers gathered around officials who read the words aloud. Ashoka ordered the planting of trees beside roads to give shade to travelers. Wells were dug along trade routes. Hospitals for humans and animals were established. Hunting was reduced in royal lands. Certain animals were protected from slaughter. Judges were instructed to be fair and compassionate. Prisoners were sometimes granted mercy. Yet this was still an empire, and empires required armies, taxes, governors, and discipline. The Mauryan military remained enormous. Thousands of war elephants stood armored with iron plates and painted symbols. Cavalry units carried spears and curved blades, while infantry marched with bows, bamboo shields, and axes. Fortresses guarded roads, mountain passes, and rivers. At the capital city of Pataliputra, scribes sat inside administrative halls recording harvests, trade shipments, census records, and military supplies. The city itself amazed foreign visitors. Massive wooden walls surrounded the metropolis. Wide avenues crossed markets overflowing with spices, silk, perfumes, sandalwood, precious stones, and exotic animals brought by merchants from distant regions. The empire was divided into provinces governed by royal officials loyal to Ashoka. Messengers on horseback rode day and night carrying imperial decrees. Riverboats moved grain taxes and soldiers across the waterways of the Ganges plain. Buddhist monks traveled under imperial protection. Some crossed the Himalayas toward Central Asia, while others sailed south to Sri Lanka. One tradition tells of Ashoka's own son, Mahinda, carrying Buddhism to the island kingdom where kings embraced the faith. Monasteries soon appeared among forests, cliffs, and ancient cities there. In western India, ports along the Arabian Sea linked the empire to Persia, Arabia, and East Africa. Ships carried black pepper, ivory, cotton cloth, gemstones, and fine steel. Indian craftsmen became famous for metalworking, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. In China, during this same period, rival kingdoms fought brutal wars before the rise of the Qin Empire. In the Mediterranean, the successors of Alexander battled for dominance while Rome slowly expanded across Italy. Across the ancient world, powerful states were competing for land, wealth, and influence. Yet Ashoka attempted something unusual. He sought to rule through morality as much as fear. But peace did not erase the burdens of empire. Maintaining control over such enormous territory demanded constant administration. After Ashoka grew, older cracks began to appear. Provincial governors gained power, regional loyalties deepened, trade routes shifted, court politics became unstable. When Ashoka died, the empire slowly weakened. Successors lacked his authority and vision, distant provinces broke away. Invaders and rival kingdoms pressed against the borders. Within decades, the mighty Mauryan Empire fragmented into smaller states. Yet the memory of Ashoka endured long after the empire collapsed. Centuries later, his stone pillars still stood across India, weathered by rain and wind. The wheel carved upon them would eventually become the symbol placed at the center of modern India's national flag. The Age of Scholars. Merchants and warriors. After the fall of the Mauryan Empire, India entered a long era of competing kingdoms, ambitious dynasties, and cultural transformation. No single empire controlled the entire subcontinent for generations. Instead, regional powers rose and fell across fertile plains, deserts, forests, mountains, and coastlines. In the northwest, waves of invaders and migrants entered through mountain passes. Greeks who remained after Alexander's campaigns established Indo-Greek kingdoms. Their rulers minted coins with Greek and Indian symbols side by side. In bustling frontier cities, philosophers, merchants, soldiers, and monks exchanged ideas from many cultures. Then came the Scythians, horse-riding warriors from Central Asia, followed by the Kushans, who forged a vast empire connecting India with the Silk Road. Under Emperor Kanishka, the Kushan Empire became a bridge between worlds. Caravans loaded with silk, jade, spices, ivory, and gold-crossed deserts, and mountains linking China, India, Persia, and Rome. The city of Taxila flourished as one of the great centers of learning in the ancient world. Students studied medicine, astronomy, warfare, mathematics, philosophy, and politics. Teachers debated logic and spirituality beneath shaded courtyards, while merchants crowded nearby markets speaking dozens of languages. Buddhism spread widely during this period. Giant monasteries were carved into cliffs and hillsides. At places like Ajanta, monks painted vivid murals showing princes, traders, dancers, animals, and scenes from the life of the Buddha. Oil lamps flickered against painted walls deep inside cave temples where chants echoed through stone chambers. Far to the south, another world was rising. Tamil kingdoms such as the Cheras, Cholas, and Pandjas dominated the southern peninsula. Their ports faced the Indian Ocean, where ships sailed toward Arabia, East Africa, and Southeast Asia. Roman merchants arrived seeking pepper pearls, ivory, and fine cotton textiles. In the markets of southern India, one could hear Greek, Egyptian, Tamil, Persian, and Arab traders bargaining loudly beside warehouses filled with spices. Elephants dragged timber through crowded streets, while fishermen brought fresh catches from the sea. Women wore bright silks and gold jewelry, while poets recited verses in royal courts. The Sangam age of southern India produced extraordinary poetry describing love, war, kingship, nature, and honor. Warriors rode into battle carrying spears, curved swords, and shields made from animal hide. Hero stones were raised to honor fallen fighters who died defending cattle villages or kings. During this era, Hindu traditions also evolved dramatically. Ancient Vedic rituals blended with local beliefs, devotional worship, temple culture, and epic storytelling. The great epics, the Mahabharata and Ramayana, spread across the land through oral tradition. Storytellers gathered crowds at night, describing mighty heroes, divine weapons, demon kings, and cosmic wars. The caste system became more structured over time, shaping social hierarchy and occupations. Priests, rulers, merchants, farmers, artisans, laborers, and communities outside the formal hierarchy each occupied different roles within society. Yet daily life varied enormously across regions and kingdoms. Villages remained the heart of India. Farmers cultivated rice, wheat, lentils, sugarcane, coconuts, bananas, and spices depending on climate and geography. Ox carts creaked along dusty roads while riverboats carried goods through inland waterways. In crowded bazaars, blacksmiths, potters, weavers, jewelers, and carpenters worked from sunrise until darkness. As centuries passed, new powers emerged and old ones vanished. But beneath the political changes, India's culture deepened, becoming richer, more layered, and more interconnected with the wider world. The Golden Age of the Guptas. Around the 4th century CE, a new dynasty rose in northern India. The Gupta rulers came from the Ganges plain and gradually expanded their influence through alliances, diplomacy, and conquest. Under Chandragupta I and his successors, the Gupta Empire became one of the most celebrated eras in Indian history. Many historians later called it a golden age. The empire reached its height under Samudragupta, a brilliant warrior king sometimes compared to Napoleon for his military campaigns. Court poets described him as undefeated in battle. His armies marched across northern India, subduing kingdoms and demanding tribute from distant rulers. Samudragupta was not merely a conqueror. He also patronized scholars, musicians, and artists. Gold coins from his reign depicted him playing a musical instrument, showing that kingship in India often celebrated both warfare and culture. The Gupta capital became a center of wealth and refinement. Noble families lived in mansions decorated with carved balconies, gardens, lotus ponds, and painted halls. Temples rose with towering stone spires covered in sculptures of gods, dancers, celestial beings, and mythical creatures. Trade flourished across land and sea. Indian merchants exported spices, textiles, ivory, perfumes, gemstones, and steel. Roman gold flowed into Indian markets while Chinese pilgrims traveled to Buddhist holy sites across the subcontinent. One of those pilgrims was Faxian from China, who journeyed across dangerous mountains and deserts to visit India. He described prosperous cities, hospitals, monasteries, and peaceful communities, though he also witnessed poverty and social divisions. The Gupta age became legendary for its achievements in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, literature, and philosophy. Scholars developed the decimal system and the concept of zero, which would later transform mathematics worldwide. Astronomers calculated planetary motions and proposed ideas about Earth's rotation centuries before similar concepts spread elsewhere. At the University of Nalanda, thousands of students studied logic, medicine, grammar, philosophy, astronomy, and Buddhist teachings. Monks from China, Korea, Southeast Asia, and Central Asia traveled there seeking knowledge. Vast libraries stored handwritten manuscripts copied carefully onto palm leaves. The playwright Kalidasa composed elegant dramas and poetry filled with romance, beauty, nature, and royal grandeur. His works would later be compared to Shakespeare in literary importance. Yet outside the courts and universities, ordinary life continued through hard labor and seasonal rhythms. Farmers depended on monsoon rains. Villages paid taxes in grain, labor, or goods. Craftsmen worked in guilds producing textiles, metal tools, jewelry, and sculptures. Religion during the Gupta period became increasingly vibrant and diverse. Hinduism expanded through temple worship, devotion to gods such as Vishnu, Shiva, and Devi, and elaborate festivals filled with music, dance, and storytelling. Buddhism and Jainism also remained influential. Massive temple complexes became the spiritual and social centers of towns. Pilgrims arrived carrying offerings, flowers, lamps, and incense. Priests conducted rituals, while dancers, musicians, and storytellers performed before crowds. But the empire eventually faced growing pressure from invaders known as the Huns, who swept into northern India from Central Asia. Fierce battles erupted across frontier regions. Cities were raided, trade weakened, and political unity fractured. After the Gupta decline, India once again divided into regional kingdoms. Yet the cultural achievements of the Gupta age endured for centuries, influencing science, art, literature, religion, and governance across Asia. The lords of the south and the oceans beyond. While northern India fractured after the fall of the Guptas, the southern kingdoms grew stronger, richer, and more ambitious. The lands of the south were different from the broad plains of the Ganges. Dense jungles covered hillsides. Coconut palms swayed beside long coastlines. Rivers flowed through fertile valleys where rice fields stretched beneath blazing tropical skies. Among the rising powers were the Pallavas, Chalukyas, Pandyas, and eventually the mighty Cholas. These kingdoms competed fiercely for land trade routes, ports, and prestige. Their wars thundered across southern India for centuries. The Pallavas ruled from Kanchipuram, a city of temples, scholars, and artisans. Stonecutters carved entire shrines directly into rock faces at Mahabalipuram beside the sea. Great stone elephants, lions, gods, and warriors emerged from granite cliffs. Sailors approaching the coast could see temple towers rising above crashing waves. The Chalukyas ruled from the Deccan Plateau further inland. Their capital at Badami stood among red sandstone cliffs filled with cave temples carved into the mountainside. Warriors on horseback guarded frontier forts, while merchants crossed dusty trade routes carrying cotton, spices, and precious stones. Battles between the Pallavas and Chalukyas became legendary. Armies of infantry, cavalry, elephants, and archers clashed beneath clouds of arrows and drums. Fortresses changed hands repeatedly. Kings sought glory not only through conquest, but also through temple-building literature and patronage of the arts. But among all southern dynasties, none would leave a greater mark upon the seas than the Cholas. The Cholas emerged slowly before exploding into power under rulers such as Raja Chola and his son Rajendra Chola. Their empire stretched across much of southern India and reached far beyond the ocean. Unlike many earlier Indian powers, the Cholas became masters of naval warfare. At the great port cities, shipbuilders worked beside crowded docks, where enormous wooden vessels were constructed from teak and other strong timbers. Sailors studied winds, currents, and monsoon seasons. Warehouses overflowed with pepper, cardamom, cinnamon, silk, ivory, sandalwood, and fine textiles. The Indian Ocean became a highway of wealth and culture. Chola fleets sailed toward Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, and beyond. Their ships carried merchants, priests, diplomats, craftsmen, and soldiers. In some regions, they traded peacefully. In others, they launched devastating attacks to secure trade dominance. One of the most dramatic expeditions came under Rajendra Chola in the 11th century. Chola fleets crossed the Bay of Bengal and attacked the Srivijaya Empire, centered around parts of modern Indonesia and Malaysia. Ports were raided, rulers defeated, and sea routes brought under Chola influence. This was one of the rare moments in history when an Indian empire projected major military power across the sea. The Chola capitals dazzled visitors. At Thanjavur, the Brihadiswara temple rose like a mountain of carved stone. Built under Raja Chola, it towered above the city with enormous gateways, intricate sculptures, and vast courtyards. Engineers transported giant blocks of granite across long distances to create the structure. Inside, priests chanted beside oil lamps while dancers, musicians, and devotees filled the temple complex. Temples during this era were more than places of worship. They were economic centers, schools, landowners, employers, and symbols of royal authority. Massive kitchens fed pilgrims. Treasury rooms stored gold, jewels, and donations. Temple festivals transformed cities into oceans of color, music, and incense. Village assemblies played important roles in local governance, especially in the south. Inscriptions carved onto temple walls recorded taxes, irrigation projects, land grants, and legal decisions. tanks, canals, and reservoirs helped farmers manage water across difficult climates. The Chola military remained powerful on land as well. Elite warriors fought with swords, spears, bows, and armor crafted from leather and metal. War elephants crashed through enemy lines while drums echoed across battlefields. Kings personally led campaigns, and victories were celebrated with ceremonies, poetry, and monumental inscriptions. At the same time, the wider world was changing rapidly. In the Middle East, Islamic caliphates expanded across Persia, North Africa, and Spain. In China, the Song dynasty developed advanced technologies and booming cities. Viking raiders struck Europe while feudal kingdoms rose and fell across the continent. India stood at the center of global trade networks. Arab merchants crossed the Arabian Sea carrying horses, dates, silver, and ideas. Chinese ceramics arrived at Indian ports, while Indian mathematics, astronomy, and medicine spread abroad. Yet no empire remained secure forever. Rival kingdoms challenged the Cholas from every direction. Internal conflicts weakened royal authority. Trade routes shifted, and military campaigns drained resources. Gradually, the great Chola Empire declined, though its cultural influence survived across South and Southeast Asia for centuries. The coming of the Crescent. For centuries, traders from Arabia had visited the western coast of India, long before armies arrived. Muslim merchants sailed with the monsoon winds to ports in Kerala and Gujarat. They traded spices, horses, pearls, and textiles, while also bringing new beliefs, languages, and customs. In coastal towns, Hindu, Muslim, Jain, and Christian communities often lived side by side. Mosques appeared beside temples, and markets filled with people from distant lands. Indian Ocean trade created cosmopolitan cities where sailors from East Africa, Persia, Arabia, and Southeast Asia mingled freely. But beyond trade, another force was rising. Across Central Asia and the Middle East, Islamic empires expanded rapidly after the 7th century. By the 8th century, Arab armies entered Sindh in northwestern India, led by Muhammad bin Qasim. Though this conquest remained limited, it marked the beginning of a long and complicated relationship between India and Islamic powers. For centuries afterward, powerful Turkic and Afghan dynasties emerged from Central Asia. These warriors were hardened by harsh landscapes, endless conflicts, and mounted warfare. Their cavalry moved swiftly across plains carrying composite bows, curved swords, and lances. In northern India, many kingdoms remained divided. Rajput rulers controlled forts and territories across deserts, hills, and plains. Rajput culture celebrated honor, bravery, loyalty, and warfare. Their massive hill forts rose above rocky cliffs guarded by thick walls, gates, and towers. Rajput warriors entered battle wearing chainmail turbans and colorful banners. Bards later sang of impossible last stands, desperate charges, and heroic deaths. Queens and noblewomen became symbols of sacrifice and resilience during sieges. One of the most important turning points came with Mahmud of Ghazni in the 11th century. He launched repeated raids into India, targeting wealthy cities and temples. His campaigns brought destruction but also demonstrated the immense riches of the subcontinent. Then, in the late 12th century, Muhammad Ghori defeated the Rajput king Prithviraj Chauhan at the Second Battle of Tarain. This victory opened the path for the establishment of Muslim rule in northern India. Out of these conquests emerged the Delhi Sultanate. Delhi transformed into the center of a growing empire, ruled by Turkic, Afghan, and later mixed dynasties. Slave soldiers, military elites, scholars, merchants, and artisans poured into the city from across Asia. Persian became the language of administration and court culture. The sultans built mosques, palaces, fortifications, and markets. One of the most striking monuments was the Qutub Minar, a towering stone minaret rising above Delhi, decorated with intricate carvings and Quranic inscriptions. The Delhi Sultanate faced constant challenges. Mongol invasions threatened from the northwest. Rajput kingdoms resisted fiercely. Rebellions erupted across distant provinces, yet the Sultanate survived through military discipline, strategic alliances, and administrative reforms. Armies of the Sultanate relied heavily on cavalry. Mounted archers could strike rapidly across open terrain. Fortified cities became crucial centers of defense. Massive walls, gates, and citadels protected urban populations from invasion and rebellion. Daily life in Delhi reflected extraordinary diversity. Persian scholars debated philosophy while Indian craftsmen produced textiles, metalwork, and jewelry. Sufi mystics attracted followers through teachings of love, spirituality, and devotion. Music, poetry, and architecture blended Persian, Central Asian, and Indian influences into entirely new cultural forms. Markets overflowed with spices, fruits, carpets, silk horses, weapons, perfumes, and precious gems. Water carriers moved through crowded streets while elephants transported nobles and goods. Rich merchants lived in lavish mansions, while laborers struggled in packed neighborhoods near workshops and bazaars. Some rulers of the Delhi Sultanate became famous for ambition and ruthlessness. Alauddin Khalji expanded the empire dramatically and defended India against repeated Mongol attacks. His armies marched deep into southern India, extracting tribute from wealthy kingdoms. Muhammad bin Tughlaq became notorious for strange experiments and grand visions. He attempted to move the capital from Delhi to Daulatabad, forcing huge populations to relocate across vast distances. Many suffered terribly during the migration. He also introduced token currency that caused economic chaos. Despite instability, the Delhi Sultanate reshaped India profoundly. It connected the subcontinent more closely with the Islamic world, stretching from Cairo to Samarkand. New foods, music, clothing, artistic styles, and technologies entered Indian society. Yet the Sultanate also faced endless conflict. Regional kingdoms rebelled repeatedly. Hindu and Muslim rulers fought for territory while alliances shifted constantly. In the south, a powerful new empire was rising that would challenge the northern sultans and create one of the greatest cities medieval India had ever seen, the City of Victory. In the 14th century, as the Delhi Sultanate weakened under invasions, rebellions, and internal struggles, two brothers named Harihara and Bukka founded a new kingdom in southern India along the banks of the Tungabhadra River. This kingdom became the Vijayanagara Empire. Its capital, Vijayanagara, meaning City of Victory, would grow into one of the largest and wealthiest cities in the world. The city stood among rocky hills, giant boulders, fertile valleys, and river crossings that created natural defenses. Massive walls surrounded districts filled with temples, palaces, markets, gardens, reservoirs, and military barracks. Travelers arriving from Persia, Portugal, and Italy described endless bazaars crowded with merchants from many lands. One market specialized entirely in horses imported from Arabia and Central Asia. Another sold diamonds, rubies, pearls, spices, silk, and perfumes. Elephants walked through broad avenues while temple bells rang in the distance. The rulers of Vijayanagara saw themselves as defenders of southern traditions against northern invasions, though their empire itself was highly diverse and connected with global trade networks. Hindu temples received royal patronage on a massive scale. Towering gateways called gopurams rose above temple complexes covered with colorful sculptures of gods, warriors, dancers, and mythical beasts. At night, oil lamps illuminated temple courtyards while musicians played drums, flutes, and stringed instruments. Dancers performed sacred rituals before crowds of pilgrims, nobles, and merchants. The empire's military became one of the largest in India. Armies included infantry, archers, cavalry war, elephants, and later artillery using gunpowder weapons obtained through contact with foreign traders. Portuguese merchants arriving by sea supplied horses, firearms, and military expertise in exchange for spices, textiles, and trading privileges. The kings of Vijayanagara constantly battled neighboring Deccan sultanates, powerful Muslim kingdoms that had emerged after the breakup of the Delhi Sultanate in the south. Warfare during this era became increasingly brutal and technologically advanced. Cannons thundered against fort walls. Cavalry charges smashed into infantry formations. Rockets, primitive but terrifying, streaked across battlefields trailing fire and smoke. Yet despite constant warfare, Vijayanagara flourished culturally and economically. Irrigation systems transformed dry lands into fertile agricultural zones. Poets, scholars, philosophers, and artists thrived under royal patronage. Literature in Sanskrit, Telugu, Kannada, and Tamil blossomed. Women in elite circles sometimes held influence in administration, religion, and trade, though ordinary women often faced strict social expectations depending on region and class. Society remained deeply hierarchical yet dynamic and culturally rich. Meanwhile, beyond India, enormous transformations were unfolding. The Ottoman Empire captured Constantinople. European kingdoms explored new sea routes searching for spices and wealth. Ming China sent giant treasure fleets across the Indian Ocean before later turning inward. Then came the catastrophe. In 1565, the combined forces of several Deccan sultanates confronted Vijayanagara at the Battle of Talikota. The battle became one of the great disasters of Indian history. The armies clashed with immense ferocity. War elephants charged beneath clouds of arrows and cannon smoke. Cavalry thundered across the plains while commanders shouted above the chaos. During the battle key, generals betrayed Vijayanagara and switched sides. The imperial army collapsed. Victorious forces marched upon Vijayanagara itself. The magnificent city was looted, burned, and devastated. Palaces, temples, markets, and homes were destroyed. Survivors fled into the countryside, carrying stories of horror and ruin. Though remnants of the empire survived for some time, its glory never fully returned. The once dazzling city of victory became a landscape of haunting stone ruins scattered among silent boulders and empty roads. Yet even as one empire fell, another force was approaching from the north. A descendant of conquerors from Central Asia crossed into India carrying dreams of empire and destiny. His name was Babur, and the guns of the north. Zahir-ud-Din. Muhammad Babur was born among the mountains and valleys of Central Asia, descended from both Timur and Genghis Khan. From childhood, he lived in a world of ambition, betrayal, warfare, and shifting alliances. Princes fought brothers. Cities changed hands repeatedly. Survival depended on courage, intelligence, and ruthless determination. Babur inherited a small kingdom at a young age but quickly lost it. Again and again, he struggled to reclaim power. He wandered through dangerous lands, gathering loyal followers and dreaming of conquest. His memoirs later revealed a man who loved poetry gardens, music, and nature, yet also possessed relentless ambition. Unable to secure lasting control in Central Asia, Babur turned his attention toward India. At that time, northern India was ruled by the Delhi Sultan Ibrahim Lodi. Though powerful on paper, the Sultan faced rebellions, distrust among nobles, and political instability. Babur saw opportunity. In 1526, he crossed into India with a relatively small but highly disciplined force. He brought with him something that would transform warfare on the subcontinent: gunpowder artillery. At the First Battle of Panipat, Babur faced an enormous army commanded by Ibrahim Lodi, including thousands of soldiers and war elephants. The plains trembled beneath the weight of advancing forces. Babur arranged his troops carefully, using carts chained together as defensive barriers, while cannons and matchlock gunners waited behind them. When the battle began, the thunder of artillery shattered the air. Smoke rolled across the battlefield. Elephants panicked at the explosions, and chaos spread through Lodi's army. Babur's cavalry attacked with speed and precision. By the end of the battle, Ibrahim Lodi lay dead among thousands of fallen soldiers. The Mughal Empire had begun. Babur entered Delhi and Agra, claiming the riches of northern India. Yet his position remained fragile. Rajput rulers, especially the powerful Rana Sanga of Mewar, challenged the new conqueror fiercely. The Rajputs were among the most formidable warriors in India. Their fortresses rose from desert cliffs and hills like stone mountains. Chittorgarh, one of their greatest strongholds, towered above the plains of Rajasthan, surrounded by massive walls, gates, and reservoirs. Rajput culture revolved around honor, kinship, warfare, and resistance. Nobles rode into battle wearing bright turbans, chain armor, and carrying swords crafted for close combat. Songs celebrated loyalty, bravery, and sacrifice unto death. Babur met Rana Sanga at the Battle of Kanwa. Once again, artillery and disciplined tactics proved decisive. The Rajputs fought ferociously, charging repeatedly into Mughal lines despite devastating cannon fire. Thousands died before Babur secured victory. Though Babur ruled only a few years, his victories established the foundation of one of the greatest empires in Indian history. He spent his final years consolidating power and creating gardens inspired by Persian traditions. Water channels, fountains, fruit trees, and shaded pavilions transformed parts of northern India into carefully designed landscapes reflecting paradise imagery from Persian culture. When Babur died, his son Humayun inherited the empire but quickly faced immense challenges. Rival Afghan rulers rebelled while internal conflicts weakened Mughal authority. One enemy in particular emerged as a brilliant commander, Sher Shah Suri. Sher Shah defeated Humayun and temporarily drove the Mughals from India. Though his reign was brief, Sher Shah proved to be one of the most capable administrators in Indian history. He improved roads across northern India, including the Grand Trunk Road, stretching from Bengal toward Afghanistan. Caravanserais, roadside inns, provided shelter for travelers, merchants, and officials. Postal systems became more efficient. Currency reforms strengthened trade. Markets expanded along these routes. Ox carts, caravans, horse riders, and wandering pilgrims moved constantly across the empire. Soldiers guarded highways against bandits while traders carried spices, silk, grain, gemstones, and textiles. Sher Shah also strengthened forts and military organization. Massive structures such as Rohtas Fort reflected the growing importance of gunpowder warfare. Thick walls, bastions, and strategic designs adapted to cannons and siege tactics. But after Sher Shah's death, his empire fragmented rapidly. Humayun eventually returned, reclaiming the Mughal throne with Persian assistance. Yet he died soon afterward in a tragic accident, reportedly falling down steps in his library. His son Akbar inherited the throne as a boy, and under Akbar the Mughal Empire would become something far greater than conquest alone. Akbar the Great. When Akbar became emperor, he was only 13 years old. Enemies surrounded the fragile Mughal state. Afghan rebels challenged imperial authority while Rajput kingdoms remained fiercely independent. Court factions competed for influence around the young ruler. At first, Akbar relied heavily on his regent Bairam Khan, a skilled military commander who secured the empire's survival. But as Akbar matured, he gradually took control himself, revealing extraordinary intelligence, energy, and ambition. He could not read or write fluently, yet possessed a remarkable memory and deep curiosity. He listened constantly to scholars, priests, generals, merchants, travelers, and philosophers. He enjoyed debates about religion, politics, warfare, and ethics, often lasting deep into the night. Akbar began expanding the empire relentlessly. Mughal armies marched across northern and central India, conquering fortresses, cities, forests, and deserts. Cannons blasted breaches into walls, while engineers built siege ramps and tunnels beneath enemy defenses. War elephants armored in steel carried towers filled with archers into battle. One of Akbar's greatest challenges came from the Rajputs. Rather than relying only on conquest, Akbar pursued alliances through diplomacy and marriage. Some Rajput rulers joined the Mughal system, becoming trusted generals and governors while retaining influence within their own regions. Others resisted bitterly. The siege of Chittorgarh became one of the defining moments of Akbar's reign. Chittorgarh Fort rose above Rajasthan upon a vast hilltop surrounded by colossal walls and gates. Inside lived warriors, nobles, artisans, priests, merchants, and families prepared for a desperate defense. As Mughal artillery bombarded the fort, defenders fought with fierce determination. Rajput warriors launched deadly counterattacks while women prepared for the possibility of Jauhar, the ritual mass self-immolation performed to avoid capture after defeat. After months of siege, the Mughals stormed the fort. The slaughter that followed shocked even later chroniclers. Yet despite such brutality, Akbar increasingly sought a broader vision of empire beyond endless bloodshed. He reorganized administration, taxation, and military structures across the empire. Provinces were governed through a complex bureaucracy. Revenue systems measured agricultural production with greater accuracy, allowing the empire to collect taxes more efficiently. The Mughal court became dazzling beyond imagination. At Fatehpur Sikri, Akbar constructed an imperial capital of red sandstone palaces, audience halls, gardens, mosques, and courtyards. Nobles from Persia, Central Asia, India, and beyond gathered there wearing embroidered robes, jewels, and silks. Elephants decorated with gold cloth paraded through the streets, while musicians performed during elaborate ceremonies. The imperial kitchens prepared enormous feasts. Rice dishes flavored with saffron, cardamom, and cloves filled giant trays beside roasted meats, sweet. Desserts, fruits, and sherbets cooled with mountain ice. Akbar encouraged cultural exchange between Hindu, Muslim, Jain, Christian, and Zoroastrian thinkers. He invited Jesuit priests from Portuguese Goa to debate religion at his court. He abolished certain discriminatory taxes against non-Muslims and promoted talented individuals regardless of religion. This policy helped stabilize the empire and win loyalty from many diverse communities. Meanwhile, trade expanded dramatically. Indian textiles became highly prized across the world. Fine muslin, silk, cotton, indigo dyes, and carpets flowed toward Europe, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. Ports on both eastern and western coasts bustled with activity. Villages formed the foundation of Mughal wealth. Farmers cultivated wheat, rice, sugarcane, cotton, and opium depending on region. Irrigation canals supported agriculture while local markets connected villages to imperial trade networks. Life for ordinary people varied greatly. Wealthy nobles lived in luxury, surrounded by servants, gardens, fountains, and private musicians. Peasants often endured heavy taxes, uncertain harvests, disease, and occasional famine. Yet even poor villages contained rich traditions of storytelling, music festivals, and crafts. In Europe during Akbar's reign, Queen Elizabeth ruled England while Spain built a global empire across the Americas. The Ottoman Empire dominated much of the Middle East and Eastern Europe. Ming China remained one of the world's greatest civilizations. Yet many foreign travelers considered Mughal India among the richest lands on earth. Akbar ruled for nearly 50 years, transforming the Mughal Empire into a vast, stable, and multicultural superpower. When he died in 1605, grief spread across the empire. Nobles, soldiers, merchants, and villagers alike understood that an extraordinary age had passed. But the Mughal story was far from over. The emperor of the world, Akbar's son, Jahangir, inherited an empire glittering with wealth and power. His name meant Caesar of the world, and he embraced imperial grandeur with confidence. Yet, unlike his father, Jahangir often preferred pleasure art gardens and courtly refinement over constant warfare. The Mughal court during his reign became famous for beauty, elegance, and ceremony. Painters created detailed miniature artworks showing birds, flowers, hunting scenes, battles, royal processions, and intimate portraits. These paintings captured astonishing realism. Artists studied nature closely, painting each feather leaf and jewel with delicate precision. Jahangir loved gardens deeply. Across Kashmir and northern India, terraces, fountains, flowing water, and flowering trees transformed landscapes into visions of paradise. Cool mountain valleys became retreats from the burning heat of the plains. But power within the empire increasingly revolved around one extraordinary woman, Nur Jahan. Born into a Persian immigrant family, she rose to become Jahangir's wife and one of the most influential women in Mughal history. Intelligent, politically skilled, and highly cultured, she issued imperial orders, influenced appointments, and appeared on coins beside the emperor's name. At court, she wore magnificent garments embroidered with pearls, emeralds, and gold thread. Perfumes filled palace chambers, while eunuchs, guards, musicians, dancers, and servants moved through marble halls illuminated by lanterns. The empire remained strong, but tensions simmered beneath the luxury. Princes competed for succession. Regional rebellions erupted periodically. Rival nobles maneuvered constantly for influence. Beyond the palaces, life across Mughal India remained vast and varied. In Lahore, Agra, Delhi, and Ahmedabad, crowded streets overflowed with traders, blacksmiths, spice sellers, money changers, jewelers, and wandering holy men. Riverboats drifted along the Yamuna and Ganges carrying grain, textiles, and passengers. Caravans crossed deserts guarded by armed escorts against bandits. In Bengal, enormous river systems supported rice cultivation and international trade. In the Deccan Plateau, warfare continued against powerful southern sultanates. European traders, meanwhile, became increasingly active along India's coasts. Portuguese ships armed with cannons dominated parts of the Indian Ocean trade network. Soon, Dutch, English, and French merchants would arrive seeking fortunes from India's immense wealth. Few at the time understood how deeply these foreigners would one day reshape the subcontinent. The builder of the Taj. When Jahangir died, a brutal struggle for succession erupted among the Mughal princes. Brothers turned against brothers. Alliances shifted in whispers through palace corridors. Armies marched beneath imperial banners while nobles gambled their fortunes on competing claimants. From this storm emerged Prince Khurram, who took the throne as Shah Jahan, meaning King of the World. Under Shah Jahan, the Mughal Empire reached a height of wealth, splendor, and architectural magnificence rarely matched in world history. The emperor believed power should be seen as well as obeyed. Cities, palaces, forts, mosques, gardens, and ceremonial avenues were redesigned to express imperial majesty. White marble became the symbol of Mughal refinement, replacing much of the earlier red sandstone architecture. At Agra and Delhi, enormous building projects transformed the landscape. Skilled craftsmen arrived from Persia, Central Asia, the Ottoman world, and every corner of India. Stonecutters, jewelers, calligraphers, engineers, sculptors, and architects worked together under imperial command. The Red Fort of Delhi rose beside the Yamuna River with towering walls, gates, audience halls, gardens, and private palaces. Inside its marble chambers, fountains flowed beneath carved ceilings inlaid with precious stones. Court ceremonies dazzled visitors from across the world. The peacock throne became the ultimate symbol of Mughal luxury. Covered with gold, diamonds, rubies, emeralds, pearls, and sapphires, it was said to shine like a vision from legend itself. Yet Shah Jahan's greatest creation came from grief. His beloved wife Mumtaz Mahal died during childbirth while accompanying him on campaign. The emperor was devastated. Court chronicles described him withdrawing from public life, consumed by sorrow. To honor her memory, he ordered the construction of a mausoleum unlike anything the world had ever seen, the Taj Mahal. For years, thousands of laborers, craftsmen, artists, and engineers worked along the riverbank at Agra. White marble arrived from distant quarries transported by elephants, ox carts, and river barges. Semi-precious stones from across Asia were cut into floral patterns and embedded into marble walls. The central dome rose slowly above gardens reflecting pools and symmetrical courtyards. Quranic verses framed the entrances, while delicate screens filtered sunlight into the inner chamber where Mumtaz Mahal rested. At dawn, the monument glowed pale pink. Under midday sun, it blazed brilliant white. In moonlight, it seemed almost unreal, floating above the river like a dream. Travelers who saw it spoke of overwhelming beauty and impossible craftsmanship. But beneath the grandeur of Shah Jahan's reign, pressures were growing. Maintaining such a vast empire required enormous taxation. Peasants bore heavy burdens, especially during failed harvests. Court luxury consumed staggering resources while military campaigns continued in the Deccan. Meanwhile, the emperor's sons watched each other carefully, knowing that succession in the Mughal Empire was never peacefully guaranteed. The princes Dara Shikoh Shah, Shuja Murad, and Aurangzeb each cultivated supporters among generals, nobles, and religious leaders. Dara, the eldest son, fascinated by philosophy and spirituality, became his father's favorite heir. He studied Hindu texts alongside Islamic teachings, seeking connections between traditions. Aurangzeb, however, was disciplined, austere, ambitious, and militarily skilled. He believed the empire required stricter leadership and stronger religious orthodoxy. As Shah Jahan aged, the rivalry between his sons darkened into deadly conflict. Then came the illness of the emperor. Rumors spread rapidly across the empire that Shah Jahan was dying. The princes moved instantly. Civil war exploded across Mughal India. Armies loyal to rival brothers marched through plains, deserts, forests, and river valleys. Cannons roared beside ancient fortresses, while cavalry charges thundered across battlefields stained with smoke, blood, and mud. At the Battle of Samuga, Aurangzeb defeated Dara Shikoh through superior tactics and ruthless determination. Dara fled desperately seeking allies, but was eventually captured, betrayed, and executed. Murad was imprisoned and killed. Shah Shuja vanished after defeat in the east. Aurangzeb then imprisoned his own father, Shah Jahan, inside Agra Fort, from a marble chamber overlooking the Yamuna River. The old emperor spent his final years gazing toward the distant Taj Mahal, where Mumtaz Mahal lay buried. When Shah Jahan died, he was placed beside her beneath the Great White Dome. Aurangzeb now ruled the Mughal Empire, and under him, the empire would reach its greatest territorial size, while also beginning the long road toward decline. Aurangzeb and the Endless Wars. Aurangzeb Alamgir ruled for nearly 50 years, and during that time, the Mughal Empire expanded farther than ever before. Its territory stretched across most of the Indian subcontinent, from the mountains of the northwest to the deep south. Yet the empire under Aurangzeb became increasingly consumed by war. Unlike Akbar, who emphasized accommodation and broad alliances, Aurangzeb pursued a more conservative vision of Islamic rule. He reimposed certain taxes upon non-Muslims and enforced stricter religious policies. Some temples were destroyed, especially in politically rebellious regions, though many others continued to receive protection and patronage depending on local circumstances. His supporters viewed him as disciplined, just, and morally serious. His critics saw intolerance and rigidity that weakened imperial unity. Aurangzeb himself lived more simply than earlier Mughal emperors. He avoided excessive luxury despite ruling immense wealth. He copied Quranic manuscripts by hand and often appeared personally devoted to religious duty. But his reign became trapped in nearly constant military campaigns. The greatest challenge came from the Deccan and the rise of the Marathas. In the rugged hills and forts of western India, a new power emerged under Shivaji Bhonsle. Born into a regional warrior family, Shivaji possessed extraordinary courage, strategic brilliance, and relentless determination. The land of the Marathas differed sharply from the northern plains. Rocky hills, dense forests, narrow mountain passes, and isolated forts shaped warfare in the region. Shivaji mastered guerrilla tactics using speed surprise and local knowledge against larger Mughal armies. His soldiers moved rapidly through mountain terrain, launching sudden attacks before vanishing into the hills. Fortresses perched upon cliffs became crucial strongholds connected by hidden paths and loyal local populations. Shivaji captured forts through stealth bribery negotiation and direct assault. One famous episode described him escaping imprisonment in Agra, hidden inside baskets, supposedly carrying sweets and gifts. He crowned himself Chhatrapati, meaning sovereign king, establishing the Maratha state and presenting himself as a defender of regional autonomy against Mughal domination. Aurangzeb viewed the Marathas as dangerous rebels and committed enormous resources to crushing them. The resulting conflict lasted decades. Mughal armies marched endlessly across the Deccan, facing heat disease, difficult terrain, supply shortages, and constant harassment. Fort after fort changed hands repeatedly. Siege warfare consumed lives and treasure on a massive scale. The scale of the conflict exhausted the empire. Meanwhile, other rebellions erupted. In the northwest, Sikh communities transformed from a spiritual movement into an increasingly militarized force after tensions with Mughal authorities deepened. Sikh gurus preached equality, devotion, courage, and resistance against oppression. Guru Gobind Singh later founded the Khalsa, creating a brotherhood of warrior believers prepared to fight and die for their faith. Jat uprisings shook regions near Agra. Rajput alliances weakened. Provincial governors accumulated greater independence. Court factions grew increasingly corrupt. Yet despite all these struggles, Mughal cities remained astonishingly rich and vibrant. Delhi bustled with traders from across Eurasia. Armenian merchants negotiated with Persians, Arabs, Indians, and Europeans. Spice markets released waves of cardamom, pepper, cinnamon, and saffron into the air. Jewelers displayed diamonds from Golconda mines, while textile merchants sold muslins so fine they were compared to woven air. European travelers marveled at India's wealth. Some estimated Mughal India produced a massive share of the world's economy during this period. In villages, however, ordinary life could be harsh. Heavy taxation, droughts, warfare, and local abuses burdened peasants. Famines periodically devastated entire regions, yet village society endured through agriculture, family networks, festivals, religious traditions, and local crafts. As Aurangzeb aged, the empire became dangerously overstretched. The emperor spent years in military camps far from the imperial capitals, trying desperately to secure total victory in the Deccan. He never fully succeeded. When Aurangzeb died in 1707, he left behind an empire vast in territory, but weakened in spirit, finances, and political stability. The machine of empire still appeared magnificent from the outside, but cracks were spreading through its foundations. The cracking of the empire. After Aurangzeb's death, the Mughal Empire entered a dangerous age of decline. Emperors still sat upon the peacock throne, surrounded by jewels, silk banners, musicians, guards, and ceremonies, but real authority weakened year by year. Succession struggles returned immediately. Princes fought civil wars, while nobles manipulated the throne for personal advantage. powerful governors began ruling provinces almost independently while still claiming loyalty to the emperor. In Bengal, Awadh, Hyderabad, and other regions, semi-autonomous states emerged led by Nawabs and Nizams who collected taxes, maintained armies, and negotiated with foreign traders largely on their own terms. The imperial treasury weakened. Endless warfare had drained resources while corruption spread through administration. Maintaining enormous armies became increasingly difficult. At the same time, new powers rose across India. The Marathas expanded rapidly after Aurangzeb's death. Their cavalry swept across central and northern India, collecting tribute and challenging Mughal authority. Fast-moving horsemen armed with swords, spears, and matchlocks raided deep into imperial territories. Maratha leaders known as Peshwas coordinated growing confederacies of regional chiefs. Their influence spread from the Deccan toward Delhi itself. Meanwhile, Sikh warriors in Punjab strengthened their resistance after years of persecution and conflict. Armed communities organized into military bands capable of challenging imperial forces. Then, from beyond India's northwest frontier came catastrophe. In 1739, Nader Shah of Persia invaded Mughal India. Nader Shah was a terrifying conqueror, forged by brutal wars across Persia and Central Asia. His disciplined army swept through Mughal defenses with shocking speed. At the Battle of Karnal, the Mughal forces suffered disastrous defeat despite their vast numbers. Nader Shah entered Delhi. What followed became one of the darkest moments in the city's history. After unrest and violence erupted, the Persian conqueror ordered a massacre. Streets filled with terror, death smoke, and screams. Homes, markets, and mansions were looted on a colossal scale. The Peacock Throne and immense treasures, including the Koh-i-Noor diamond, were carried away to Persia. The psychological blow was devastating. The Mughal Empire never truly recovered. Soon, another invader, Ahmad Shah Durrani from Afghanistan, launched repeated attacks into northern India. His invasions intensified chaos and conflict among regional powers competing for dominance. One of the greatest battles of the 18th century unfolded at Panipat in 1761 between the Marathas and Ahmad Shah Durrani. The scale was immense. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, camp followers, laborers, merchants, families, and animals gathered across the plains. Cannons lined defensive positions while cavalry forces stretched toward the horizon. The battle itself became a slaughter beyond imagination. Afghan cavalry charges smashed into Maratha lines while artillery thundered continuously. By the end, tens of thousands lay dead. Survivors wandered battlefields filled with corpses, broken weapons, dying animals, and burning camps. Though Durrani eventually withdrew, the Marathas suffered catastrophic losses. No single Indian power could fully replace Mughal dominance. And into this fractured landscape stepped foreign trading companies from Europe. Among them, one company would rise above all others: the English East India Company. At first, the company appeared merely commercial. English merchants established coastal trading posts at Surat, Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta, seeking spices, textiles, tea, indigo, and profits. But these merchants came armed. European ships carried powerful cannons. Company officials negotiated treaties, manipulated rivalries, and gradually built private armies composed largely of Indian soldiers called sepoys. French, Portuguese, and Dutch traders also competed fiercely for influence across Indian ports and courts. Indian rulers often saw Europeans as useful allies against local enemies. Few yet understood that these foreign companies were preparing not only to trade in India, but eventually to rule it. The company that became a kingdom. The English East India Company began as a business enterprise granted permission by the English crown to trade in the East. Its merchants arrived seeking spices, silk, cotton, indigo, saltpeter, and tea. At first, they depended entirely upon the goodwill of Indian rulers. They paid customs duties, negotiated trading rights, and constructed fortified warehouses along the coasts. But over time, the company changed. Its officers learned Indian politics carefully. They studied rivalries between nawabs, princes, bankers, generals, and merchants. They bribed officials, formed alliances, raised armies, and intervened in local disputes whenever profit demanded it. The company's settlements at Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta grew into powerful fortified cities. European-style buildings rose beside crowded Indian bazaars. Warehouses overflowed with textiles and goods awaiting shipment to Europe. Dockyards echoed with hammering as ships were repaired and loaded. Indian textiles, especially fine cotton and muslin, became wildly popular in Europe. Wealth poured into company coffers. Investors in London dreamed of fortunes from the East, yet trade alone was no longer enough. In Bengal, one of the richest provinces in the world, the young Nawab Siraj-ud-Dowlah grew suspicious of company ambitions. Bengal's fertile lands produced immense agricultural wealth, while its artisans created some of the finest fabrics on earth. Rivers connected thriving cities, villages, and ports across the region. Calcutta, meanwhile, had become heavily fortified by the British. Siraj-ud-Dowlah saw this as a threat to his authority. Conflict became inevitable. In 1757, Robert Clive and the East India Company confronted the Nawab at the Battle of Plassey. The battle itself was surprisingly small compared to later wars, but its consequences transformed history. Company agents had secretly bribed key figures within the Nawab's camp, including Mir Jafar, one of his generals. As the battle unfolded, large parts of the Bengali army failed to fight effectively. Rain soaked gunpowder supplies, while confusion spread across the field. Siraj-ud-Dowlah fled and was later captured and killed. The East India Company emerged as the true power in Bengal. This victory gave the company access to staggering wealth. Revenues collected from Indian peasants and merchants now financed company armies, expansions, and political influence. A private corporation effectively became the ruler of millions. Company officials often amassed personal fortunes through corruption, exploitation, and monopolies. Some returned to Britain immensely wealthy, earning the nickname Nabobs. Meanwhile, conditions for ordinary people in Bengal worsened terribly under exploitative taxation and economic disruption. Then came famine. The Bengal famine of 1770 devastated the region. Crops failed, but company revenue demands remained harsh. Millions died from starvation, disease, and social collapse. Villages emptied. Corpses lay beside roads. Survivors wandered desperately searching for food. Yet despite disaster, the company continued expanding. Its armies, composed mostly of Indian sepoys, but commanded by British officers, defeated rival Indian powers one by one. Mysore, under Hyder Ali and later his son Tipu Sultan, became one of the fiercest opponents of British expansion. Tipu Sultan ruled from Seringapatam in southern India. He modernized his military, adopted rocket artillery, and sought alliances with France against the British. Known as the Tiger of Mysore, he terrified his enemies with aggressive campaigns and innovative tactics. The Anglo-Mysore Wars became brutal contests involving sieges, cavalry raids, artillery duels, and shifting alliances. In one famous battle, Mysorean rockets streaked across the sky, trailing fire and smoke, terrifying opposing forces. Tipu Sultan died defending Seringapatam in 1799, fighting amid the chaos as British troops stormed the city. The British victory shocked many Indian rulers. It demonstrated that even determined resistance by modernizing states could fail against the company's growing military machine. The Marathas also fought multiple wars against the British. Once the strongest power in India after Mughal decline, they struggled against internal divisions and coordinated British strategy. One by one, Maratha leaders were defeated or forced into treaties. By the early 19th century, the East India Company controlled vast territories across India, either directly or indirectly. Yet this was not merely military conquest. The company reshaped Indian society economically and politically. Traditional industries suffered under competition from British manufactured goods. Indian textiles, once dominant globally, faced devastating decline as British factories mass-produced cloth during the Industrial Revolution. Railways, telegraphs, canals, and roads gradually expanded, often designed primarily to move troops, goods, and resources efficiently across the colony. English education systems trained new classes of clerks, lawyers, and administrators. Some Indians saw opportunities within these changes, while others saw humiliation, exploitation, and cultural destruction. British officials frequently viewed themselves as superior rulers, bringing civilization progress and order. Many Indians deeply resented such attitudes, especially as racial discrimination hardened over time. At the same moment, Britain itself was transforming into the greatest industrial empire on Earth. Steam engines powered factories. Coal smoke darkened city skies. Massive wealth from colonies fueled imperial expansion. India became known as the jewel in the crown. But beneath the surface, anger was growing. And soon that anger would erupt into one of the greatest uprisings against colonial rule in history, the Great Rebellion. By the middle of the 19th century, British control over India had expanded enormously. The East India Company governed vast territories directly, while princely states remained under indirect influence. British officials collected taxes, enforced laws, controlled trade, and commanded armies of Indian sepoys. Yet resentment spread across many layers of society. Peasants suffered under harsh taxation and land policies. Traditional rulers lost territories through annexation. Soldiers feared cultural and religious disrespect. Artisans saw industries collapse. Priests, nobles, farmers, and merchants all carried grievances against company rule. Then came the spark. In 1857, rumors spread among sepoys that new rifle cartridges were greased with cow and pig fat. Soldiers were required to bite the cartridges open before loading them into rifles. For Hindu and Muslim soldiers, this became deeply offensive, violating religious beliefs. Distrust exploded. At Meerut, sepoys rebelled against their British officers. The uprising spread rapidly across northern and central India. Rebels marched to Delhi, where they declared the aging Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar as symbolic leader of the rebellion. Suddenly, cities, forts, villages, and military garrisons erupted into chaos. The rebellion became a vast and violent conflict involving many different groups with different goals. Some fought to restore old rulers. Others sought freedom from British domination. Some simply seized opportunities amid collapsing authority. Delhi became one of the main centers of resistance. Rebel soldiers, nobles, artisans, and civilians crowded the ancient city. Cannons lined the walls, while desperate fighting raged through narrow streets and marketplaces. British forces laid siege to Delhi for months. Heat, disease, hunger, and artillery bombardment devastated both sides. When British troops finally stormed the city, brutal reprisals followed. Large sections of Delhi were destroyed. Countless civilians suffered terribly. At Kanpur, fierce fighting unfolded between rebel forces led by Nana Sahib and British defenders. Massacres committed by both sides intensified hatred and vengeance throughout the conflict. At Lucknow, British residents and soldiers endured a famous siege inside the residency compound while rebel forces surrounded them. Snipers, artillery, and disease turned the siege into a nightmare. One of the most celebrated rebel leaders was Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi. Widowed and denied recognition of her adopted heir under British policies, she became a symbol of resistance. Wearing armor and riding horseback, she led troops into battle against British forces. Legends later described her fighting with unmatched courage, sword in hand, amid smoke, fire, and cavalry charges. She died in battle but became immortal in Indian memory. The rebellion spread across enormous regions but lacked unified leadership and coordination. Some princely states supported the British, while others joined the uprising. Sikh regiments, Gurkha soldiers, and many local rulers sided with the British for their own strategic reasons. Gradually, British reinforcements arrived from across the empire. The suppression became savage. Entire villages suspected of aiding rebels were destroyed. Prisoners were executed publicly. Rebel soldiers were sometimes tied to cannons and blown apart as punishment. By 1858, the rebellion had largely been crushed. The consequences changed India forever. The East India Company was abolished. Rule passed directly to the British Crown. Queen Victoria became Empress of India. British authorities promised greater respect for Indian religions and traditions while also tightening control. The Mughal Empire officially ended. Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last Mughal emperor, was exiled to Rangoon in Burma. Old and broken, he spent his final years far from Delhi writing sorrowful poetry about lost exile and vanished glory. The British now ruled India directly as the British Raj. Railways expanded rapidly across the subcontinent. Telegraph lines connected distant cities. Hill stations in cooler mountain regions became retreats for British officials escaping the heat of the plains. Cities like Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras grew into major colonial centers filled with government buildings, banks, courts, universities, clubs, churches, docks, and factories. Yet colonial society remained deeply unequal. British elites often lived in segregated neighborhoods with grand bungalows, servants' gardens, and exclusive clubs. Indians faced racial discrimination in administration, military ranks, and public life, despite their crucial role in sustaining the empire. Still, new ideas were spreading. Western education exposed many Indians to concepts of nationalism, democracy, liberty, and constitutional rights. Newspapers in English and Indian languages debated reform, politics, and identity. A new generation was emerging, and they would eventually challenge the British Empire itself, the Raj and the Awakening. After the rebellion, the British Raj tightened its grip across the subcontinent. Viceroys governed from grand colonial capitals, while thousands of British civil servants, judges, soldiers, engineers, and merchants spread through India's cities, districts, railways, plantations, and ports. The empire now ruled directly in the name of the British Crown. At the center of imperial authority stood Calcutta until later. Delhi became the capital once more. Government buildings rose in imposing European styles with domes, columns, and sweeping avenues designed to project permanence and power. The British believed they were creating order through administration, law, railways, telegraphs, and modern institutions. And in some ways, India changed dramatically under their rule. Railway tracks spread across deserts, jungles, mountains, and plains. Steam locomotives thundered through the countryside, carrying soldiers, merchants, pilgrims, laborers, and raw materials. For the first time, enormous distances could be crossed in days instead of weeks. Stations became worlds unto themselves, filled with tea sellers, porters, travelers, and the smoke of iron engines. Rich passengers occupied first-class carriages while crowded. Third-class compartments carried laborers. Pilgrims and farmers packed tightly together. Telegraph lines connected distant provinces with astonishing speed. News that once took months to travel could now cross the subcontinent in hours. Universities opened in Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras, producing lawyers, journalists, scholars, and political thinkers. Some Indians entered government service or became doctors, engineers, and professors educated in English institutions. Yet beneath this appearance of progress, deep inequalities remained. British industries benefited enormously from Indian raw materials, while many local crafts declined further. Famines repeatedly devastated regions under colonial economic policies. Grain exports sometimes continued even while millions starved. One of the worst disasters came during the Great Famine of the 1870s and later famines in the 1890s. Crops failed under drought conditions, but rigid colonial policies and inadequate relief worsened suffering terribly. Villagers abandoned dying lands. Skeleton-thin children wandered roads searching for food. Entire communities vanished. At the same time, lavish imperial ceremonies displayed unimaginable wealth. Delhi Darbars celebrated British monarchs with gigantic processions, elephants, jeweled princes, cavalry bands, fireworks, and feasts. Indian princes under British rule continued governing princely states across much of the subcontinent. Some rulers modernized their territories, building railways, schools, hospitals, and palaces. Others became symbols of extravagant luxury. Hyderabad, Mysore, Baroda, Jaipur, Kashmir, Gwalior, and many other princely states maintained courts filled with silk carpets, chandeliers, musicians, hunting parties, and ceremonial guards. The Maharajas fascinated Europeans. Photographs showed rulers wearing pearls, diamonds, turbans, and embroidered robes standing beside Rolls-Royce cars or hunting tigers atop elephants. Yet while princes enjoyed privilege, many ordinary Indians faced crushing poverty. New political consciousness slowly emerged among educated Indians, frustrated by racial discrimination and exclusion from meaningful power. In 1885, the Indian National Congress was founded. At first, the Congress consisted mainly of educated elites, lawyers, journalists, teachers, and professionals seeking greater Indian participation within the empire rather than complete independence. They petitioned politely for reforms, representation, and civil rights. But younger voices demanded more. Bal Gangadhar Tilak declared that self-rule was a birthright. Newspapers spread nationalist ideas in multiple languages. Public gatherings, speeches, and protests grew larger each year. Then in 1905, the British partitioned Bengal, claiming administrative efficiency. Many Indians saw the move as an attempt to divide Hindus and Muslims politically. Mass protests erupted. The Swadeshi movement encouraged Indians to boycott British goods and support local industries. Crowds burned imported cloth in public demonstrations, while students, activists, and workers organized strikes, marches, and political campaigns. The British responded with arrests, censorship, and crackdowns. Revolutionary groups also emerged. Some young nationalists embraced armed resistance assassinations and bombings against colonial officials. Secret societies formed in cities and towns fueled by anger and idealism. Meanwhile, global events reshaped Indian politics. Japan's victory over Russia in 1905 shocked the world, proving an Asian power could defeat a European empire. Anti-colonial movements spread across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Then came the First World War. Over 1 million Indian soldiers served overseas for the British Empire, fighting in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. In muddy trenches of France, Indian troops faced machine guns, artillery, poison gas, and freezing winters far from home. They fought bravely in battles. Many barely understood politically, believing service might lead to greater rights and recognition afterward. But after the war, disappointment and fury spread instead. Economic hardship, inflation, and political repression intensified across India. And soon, a massacre in Punjab would transform the struggle forever. The Mahatma. In 1919, thousands gathered peacefully at Jallianwala Bagh in Amritsar, Punjab. Some came to protest British laws allowing detention without trial. Others attended a festival, gathering unaware of the political tensions. The garden was enclosed by walls with limited exits. Without warning, British troops under General Reginald Dyer entered the area and opened fire on the unarmed crowd. Bullets tore through men, women, and children trapped inside the enclosure. Panic erupted instantly. People screamed, ran, and fell. Some jumped into wells trying desperately to escape gunfire. The firing continued for minutes. When it ended, the ground was covered with bodies. News of the massacre spread shock and rage across India. Faith in British justice shattered for millions. Among those deeply affected was Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Born in Gujarat, trained as a lawyer, and shaped by experiences fighting discrimination in South Africa, Gandhi had already begun advocating nonviolent resistance rooted in moral courage, discipline, and mass participation. Now he emerged as the central figure of the independence movement. Simple in appearance, dressed often in homespun cloth, Gandhi traveled endlessly across India by train, bullock cart, and on foot. He visited villages, factories, temples, mosques, and cities, speaking directly to ordinary people. He urged Indians to reject fear, reject violence, and reject cooperation with unjust rule. His message transformed politics. Independence was no longer only the concern of elites, lawyers, or intellectuals. Farmers, laborers, women, students, merchants, and villagers joined the movement in huge numbers. Gandhi encouraged spinning khadi cloth as a symbol of economic self-reliance. Bonfires of imported British textiles became acts of protest. British authorities arrested him repeatedly, but imprisonment only increased his influence. At the same time, other leaders shaped the struggle in different ways. Jawaharlal Nehru inspired younger nationalists with visions of modern democracy, industry, science, and socialism. Subhas Chandra Bose advocated more militant resistance against British rule. Bhagat Singh became a revolutionary hero after attacking colonial officials and embracing martyrdom with fearless defiance. Muhammad Ali Jinnah increasingly argued that Muslims required stronger political safeguards and representation within any future independent India. Tensions between communities slowly deepened alongside the anti-colonial struggle. Meanwhile, life under the Raj continued with sharp contrasts. Bombay's textile mills roared with industrial noise while wealthy merchants built grand Art Deco mansions. Calcutta remained a center of intellectual debate, literature, and revolutionary politics. Delhi displayed imperial architecture designed to symbolize eternal British authority, yet rural India still contained immense poverty. Farmers depended on uncertain monsoons while debt trapped countless families. Caste discrimination shaped daily existence for millions. Reformers such as B.R. Ambedkar challenged social oppression, fiercely demanding dignity and equality for lower caste communities. Then Gandhi launched one of the most famous protests in modern history, the Salt March. British law taxed salt, a basic necessity for rich and poor alike. Gandhi chose this simple issue, deliberately understanding its universal power. In 1930, he began marching from Sabarmati Ashram toward the Arabian Sea, accompanied by followers. Villagers lined roads to greet the marchers, offering food, water, flowers, and prayers. Day after day, the movement grew. By the time Gandhi reached the coast, crowds had become enormous. He bent down, lifted natural salt from the shore, and symbolically broke British law. Across India, millions followed his example. The British arrested over 60,000 people during the campaign. Protesters faced beatings, imprisonment, and shootings, yet the movement continued. Foreign journalists covered the events closely. Images of unarmed demonstrators confronting imperial power damaged Britain's moral reputation worldwide. Still, independence remained distant. The British Empire was weakening, but not yet defeated. Then the world plunged into another catastrophic war, Revolution and Partition. When the Second World War began, Britain declared India at war without consulting Indian leaders. Once again, millions of Indian soldiers were recruited into imperial armies fighting across North Africa, Italy, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. Indian troops battled German tanks in deserts, crossed Burmese jungles against Japanese forces, and endured brutal conditions across multiple continents. The war transformed India economically and politically. Factories expanded rapidly, producing weapons, uniforms, vehicles, and supplies. Cities filled with wartime industries, labor shortages, and rising prices. Yet, beneath the surface, political tensions exploded. Gandhi and the Congress demanded immediate independence, arguing Britain could not fight for freedom abroad while denying it in India. In 1942, the Quit India movement launched mass protests, strikes, sabotage, and demonstrations across the country. British authorities responded, harshly arresting Gandhi, Nehru, and much of the Congress leadership almost immediately. But unrest continued. Railway tracks were damaged, telegraph lines cut, government offices attacked. Young activists operated underground networks, spreading resistance despite arrests and censorship. Meanwhile, another dramatic force emerged outside India. Subhas Chandra Bose escaped British surveillance and eventually allied with Axis powers, hoping to free India through military struggle. He formed the Indian National Army from Indian prisoners of war captured by Japan. Bose inspired intense loyalty among supporters who viewed him as a fearless patriot willing to fight by any means necessary. His troops marched alongside Japanese forces toward India through Burma, though the campaign ultimately failed. At the same time, Bengal suffered another catastrophic famine in 1943. War disruptions, inflation, crop failures, and colonial policies combined into disaster. Millions starved. Photographs showed skeletal figures lying beside roads too weak to move. Children with hollow eyes searched markets for scraps, while disease spread through overcrowded refugee camps. The famine became one of the darkest tragedies of British rule. After the war, Britain emerged exhausted, financially weakened, and increasingly unable to maintain its empire. Across India, demands for independence became unstoppable. But another crisis loomed. Relations between the Congress and the Muslim League deteriorated badly. Muhammad Ali Jinnah and the Muslim League argued that Muslims feared domination in a Hindu-majority independent India. They demanded a separate nation called Pakistan. Communal tensions intensified. Riots erupted in cities including Calcutta, Lahore, and elsewhere. Neighbors who had lived side by side for generations suddenly turned against one another amid fear, rumors, political propaganda, and revenge killings. British authorities prepared to leave quickly. In 1947, the decision was made to partition British India into two independent dominions, India and Pakistan. The borders were drawn hastily by officials who barely understood the regions they divided. What followed became one of the largest and bloodiest migrations in human history. Millions of Hindus, Sikhs, and Muslims fled across newly created borders, seeking safety among their own communities. Endless columns of refugees moved on foot, by train, by ox cart, carrying children, belongings, memories, and grief. Violence erupted everywhere. Villages burned. Trains arrived filled only with corpses. Families vanished during massacres, abductions, and forced migrations. Women suffered horrific assaults. Ancient communities collapsed almost overnight. Some estimates suggest over 1 million people died during partition. On August 15, 1947, India became independent. Jawaharlal Nehru addressed the nation, speaking of India's tryst with destiny as crowds celebrated freedom after centuries of foreign rule. But even amid celebration, the land was drowning in sorrow. Gandhi refused to join official festivities. Instead, he walked through riot-torn communities, trying desperately to stop bloodshed through fasting, prayer, and moral appeal. Months later, in January 1948, Gandhi was assassinated by a Hindu extremist who believed he had betrayed Hindu interests. The Mahatma fell to the ground, speaking the name of God. India mourned. The British Empire in India had ended. but the wounds of partition would shape the future of South Asia for generations to come. The birth of a new nation. Independence arrived not as peace, but as exhaustion, grief, and uncertainty. Across the newly formed nations of India and Pakistan, millions struggled to rebuild lives shattered by partition. Refugee camps stretched across cities, fields, and railway stations. Families searched desperately for missing relatives. Children wandered among crowds calling out names that would never answer. Temples, mosques, and schools became shelters filled with fear, illness, and hunger. Delhi transformed almost overnight. Muslim families fled toward Pakistan, while Hindu and Sikh refugees poured into the city from Punjab and beyond. Entire neighborhoods changed identity within weeks. Jawaharlal Nehru now stood as the first Prime Minister of independent India. Elegant, thoughtful, and deeply influenced by ideas of democracy, secularism, science, and socialism, he faced immense challenges. The new nation inherited staggering diversity. Hundreds of languages, religions, castes, ethnic groups, and princely states existed within the borders of India. Poverty remained widespread. Literacy rates were low. Industry was limited. Communal violence still threatened stability. One of the greatest tasks involved integrating the princely states into the Union. At independence, more than 500 princely states technically remained semi-autonomous under their rulers. Some joined India quickly, while others hesitated or resisted. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, known as the Iron Man of India, played a crucial role during this period. Through negotiation, pressure, diplomacy, and occasionally force, he oversaw the integration of most princely states into the Indian Union. In Hyderabad, the Nizam initially sought independence despite ruling a population mostly composed of Hindus. Tensions escalated into violence and unrest. Eventually, Indian forces entered the state in Operation Polo, and Hyderabad became part of India. In Kashmir, events turned even more dangerous. The princely state of Jammu and Kashmir had a Muslim-majority population, but was ruled by a Hindu Maharaja. As partition unfolded, tribal fighters from Pakistan entered the region. The Maharaja sought military assistance from India and agreed to join the Indian Union. War erupted between India and Pakistan. Soldiers battled across mountains, valleys, glaciers, and rugged terrain. Villages burned while civilians fled through dangerous passes beneath freezing skies. The conflict eventually halted under a United Nations-mediated ceasefire, leaving Kashmir divided but unresolved. The issue would continue haunting relations between India and Pakistan for decades. Meanwhile, India began building democratic institutions on a massive scale. A constitution was drafted under the leadership of B.R. Ambedkar, one of the most influential intellectuals and social reformers in Indian history. Born into a community oppressed by caste discrimination, Ambedkar fought relentlessly for equality, justice, and legal rights. The Constitution of India created a democratic republic, guaranteeing universal adult suffrage regardless of caste, religion, wealth, or gender. This was revolutionary for such a vast, poor, and diverse country. Elections soon became enormous exercises in human organization. Millions who had never voted before lined up at polling stations in villages, cities, jungles, mountains, and deserts. Ballot boxes traveled by elephant, camel boat, and foot into remote regions. Many foreign observers doubted democracy could survive in India. Yet election after election, the system endured. Nehru emphasized industrialization, scientific progress, and national planning. Giant dams, steel plants, research institutes, and factories became symbols of modern India. Bakra Nangal Dam rose across northern rivers, while new cities such as Chandigarh were designed with modern architecture and ambitious urban visions. Universities and institutes of technology trained future scientists, engineers, and administrators. India sought to become self-sufficient through planned economic development. At the same time, social realities remained harsh. Millions still lived in villages without electricity, clean water, healthcare, or schools. Caste discrimination continued despite legal abolition of untouchability. Women often faced severe restrictions depending on region and social background. Yet Indian culture flourished in remarkable ways. Cinema became one of the nation's great unifying forces. Bombay, later called Mumbai, emerged as the center of a massive film industry producing musicals, dramas, romances, and historical epics watched by audiences across South Asia and beyond. Radio broadcasts carried songs, speeches, cricket, commentary, and news into homes and tea shops across the country. Train stations echoed with vendors selling chai, newspapers, fruit, and snacks while passengers discussed politics, cinema, and cricket endlessly. India also positioned itself internationally as a leader of newly independent nations emerging after colonialism. Nehru worked alongside figures such as Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt and Josip Broz Tito of Yugoslavia in the non-aligned movement seeking independence from both American and Soviet Cold War blocs. But peace remained fragile. Tensions with China were rising high in the Himalayas, and another war was coming, the Mountains of Fire. During the early years after independence, India and China initially spoke of friendship, solidarity, and Asian cooperation. Both nations had emerged from long periods of foreign domination and internal turmoil. Leaders spoke of peaceful coexistence and a shared future. Yet beneath diplomatic smiles, unresolved borders stretched across some of the harshest terrain on Earth. The Himalayas, ancient mountain ranges covered in snow, ice, rock, and thin air, separated India and China across enormous distances. Maps drawn during colonial times remained unclear and disputed, especially in regions such as Aksai Chin and Arunachal Pradesh. At first, many Indians believed war between the two civilizations was unthinkable. Then, tensions escalated rapidly after China consolidated control over Tibet. The Dalai Lama fled into India after an uprising against Chinese rule in 1959. China viewed India's support for Tibetan refugees with suspicion. Border patrols clashed increasingly in remote mountain passes. Indian soldiers stationed at high altitude endured brutal conditions. Thin oxygen, freezing temperatures, isolation, and dangerous terrain made survival itself difficult. Supply lines stretched across narrow mountain roads, vulnerable to landslides, snowstorms, and avalanches. In 1962, war erupted suddenly. Chinese forces launched coordinated attacks across disputed sectors of the border. Indian troops, often poorly equipped and inadequately prepared, faced overwhelming assaults through mountain terrain. Battles unfolded among icy ridges, cliffs, valleys, and snow-covered passes where gunfire echoed across frozen landscapes. Soldiers fought at altitudes where breathing itself became painful. Many Indian units resisted desperately despite impossible conditions. Some were surrounded entirely, cut off from supplies and reinforcements. Stories later emerged of last stands where soldiers fought to the final bullet. The war shocked India deeply. Within weeks, Chinese forces advanced significantly before eventually declaring a ceasefire and withdrawing from some territories while retaining control of others. The defeat shattered India's confidence and transformed its military priorities. Defense modernization accelerated rapidly afterward. Jawaharlal Nehru aged visibly after the war. The dream of easy Asian solidarity had collapsed in the mountains. Yet while India struggled with external threats, it also faced enormous internal transformations. The Green Revolution began changing agriculture through high-yielding crop varieties, irrigation fertilizers, and mechanization. Wheat and rice production increased dramatically in some regions, reducing dependence on food imports. Cities expanded rapidly as industries grew. Rural migrants arrived seeking work in factories, docks, construction sites, and offices. Urban life became increasingly crowded, chaotic, and energetic. Street markets overflowed with bicycles, fabrics, vegetables, radios, spices, and books. Rickshaws, buses, taxis, and scooters battled through packed roads while sacred cows wandered calmly through traffic. Religious festivals filled cities with light music processions and color. During Diwali, fireworks illuminated night skies, while during Eid markets buzzed with celebration, and during holy crowds threw clouds of bright powder across streets and courtyards. Yet India's democracy also faced major tests. Political opposition grew stronger. Regional movements demanded greater autonomy and recognition. Linguistic tensions reshaped state boundaries as provinces were reorganized according to dominant languages. Then, in 1965, war erupted again with Pakistan over Kashmir. Tank battles thundered across Punjab while fighter jets dueled overhead. Soldiers fought through trenches, artillery barrages, and border villages. The conflict ended without decisive territorial change, but reinforced the hostility between the two nations. Only a few years later, another crisis exploded. In East Pakistan, political repression and conflict triggered a massive refugee crisis, spilling millions into India. War followed in 1971. Indian forces supported Bengali nationalists fighting for independence. Battles unfolded across rivers, jungles, towns, and villages of East Pakistan. The war moved rapidly. Within weeks, Pakistani forces surrendered in Dhaka. A new nation was born, Bangladesh. India emerged from the conflict with greatly increased regional influence, while Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, daughter of Nehru, gained enormous popularity. But triumph soon gave way to darker chapters. The emergency Indira Gandhi became one of the most powerful and controversial leaders in Indian history. Intelligent, determined, and politically ruthless, she dominated Indian politics during a turbulent era. At first, many admired her as a strong leader who had guided India through war, famine pressures, and economic difficulties. But over time, criticism grew. Inflation, unemployment, corruption accusations, and political unrest spread across the country. Student protests erupted. Opposition leaders accused the government of authoritarian tendencies. Then, in 1975, a court found Indira Gandhi guilty of electoral misconduct, threatening her position as prime minister. What happened next stunned the nation. Indira Gandhi declared a state of emergency. Civil liberties were suspended. Opposition leaders, journalists, activists, and critics were arrested. Press censorship expanded. Newspapers faced restrictions, and fear spread through political circles. The government argued extraordinary measures were necessary to restore order and stability. Supporters claimed trains ran on time, strikes declined, and administrative efficiency improved. Critics saw something far more dangerous. Democracy itself appeared under threat. One of the most controversial campaigns involved forced sterilization drives associated especially with Sanjay Gandhi, Indira's son. In poor neighborhoods and villages, many people faced pressure, intimidation, or coercion in population control programs. Slums in Delhi were demolished during aggressive urban beautification projects, displacing thousands of vulnerable residents. Yet despite repression, resistance quietly survived. Underground publications circulated secretly. Political prisoners debated strategy inside jails. Ordinary citizens whispered frustrations in homes, tea shops, trains, and university campuses. Then, in 1977, Indira Gandhi unexpectedly called elections, believing she would easily win. Instead, voters shocked the world. The ruling government was defeated peacefully through the ballot box. Power transferred democratically to opposition leaders, proving once again the resilience of Indian democracy despite immense pressures. Indira Gandhi later returned to power, but the emergency remained a permanent warning about how fragile freedom could become. Meanwhile, India itself continued changing rapidly. Television entered more homes. Cricket grew into a national obsession, uniting people across language, religion, and class. Bollywood films became larger, louder, and more influential than ever. Scientific achievements also expanded. India developed nuclear capabilities, conducting its first nuclear test in 1974, calling it a peaceful nuclear explosion. Yet unrest simmered in several regions, especially Punjab. Some Sikh groups demanded greater autonomy, while extremist militancy grew more violent over time. Armed militants fortified themselves inside the Golden Temple complex in Amritsar, one of Sikhism's holiest sites. In 1984, the Indian government launched Operation Blue Star, sending the army into the temple complex to remove militants. Heavy fighting erupted. The operation caused deep anger among many Sikhs worldwide, especially because damage occurred within the sacred site itself. Months later, Indira Gandhi was assassinated by two of her Sikh bodyguards. Her death unleashed horrifying anti-Sikh riots in Delhi and other cities. Mobs attacked Sikh homes, businesses, and gurdwaras while thousands were killed. Survivors later spoke of police inaction, fear, smoke, and unimaginable brutality. Rajiv Gandhi, Indira's son, became prime minister, promising modernization and technological progress. Computers, telecommunications, and economic reforms slowly expanded, but corruption scandals and insurgencies in Kashmir, Punjab, and the Northeast complicated his government. Then, in 1991, Rajiv Gandhi too was assassinated during an election campaign by a suicide bomber linked to Sri Lankan Tamil militants. India once again stood at a crossroads, and another transformation was about to begin.